These young men you're about to see were from my home area in southern Utah, just a bit older than I. When I was 10 years old, they were shipping off to Korea. I couldn't have imagined what they were about to face in that war-torn country. None of us could, but we are so grateful for what they did.
This is the story of the 213th Field Artillery Battalion of young men from southern Utah, from towns like St. George, Cedar City, Richfield, Fillmore, and Beaver. Many of them ranged in age from 18 to 22. They were doing things that young men do, attending school, working on farms, playing sports, and spending time with their families. They also spent one weekend a month in training as National Guardsmen. But they were young volunteers who didn't know much about being soldiers and had never been anywhere near war or combat of any kind.
The invasion of the Republic of Korea was a direct challenge to the principles of the United Nations.
Unexpectedly, in 1950, they were called upon to leave their homes and enter the Korean War. They didn't know where Korea was or what the war was about, but they accepted the call to serve based on faith in their leaders, their family, and their God, and with an understanding that freedom isn't free. Just before they shipped out, the St. George Temple president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Harold S. Snow, met with them and promised that if they lived true and faithful to their God, he would protect them through the challenges that lie ahead.
And he just told them if they would keep the commandments, everything, then they'd come back okay.
President Snow, before we left for Korea, promised me, he says, that you men from southern Utah are going into some rather perilous days ahead of you. He says, you don't need to worry, you're going to be preserved. You're going to be all right. And that's about the only thing I remember, the things he told us that day in the temple here in St. George. That promise was made, and I didn't think any more about it. And I didn't think much about it until years later, after we'd gotten back, and I suddenly realized what had been promised us.
The men of the 213th were first sent to Fort Lewis, Washington for further training as artillerymen. They were smart, diligent, hard-working soldiers, and their trainers assessed them as best in the business. Perhaps they were a little too good. Instead of being sent to Germany as backups to free up full-time soldiers, they were shipped directly to the fighting in Korea. Upon arrival in Busan, they immediately stood out. They were different from other soldiers. They were good, clean-living, obedient Latter-day Saint young men. Their leader, Lieutenant Colonel Frank Daly, was like a father Helaman to these young modern-day stripling warriors. He called them his sons. He knew their families and parents and felt that if even one of them didn't make it safely home, he'd never be able to face their parents again. He was a man of deep faith who spent a significant amount of time each day in sincere prayer with his Heavenly Father.
I know I saw Colonel Daly on his knees more than once. And I know he asked for help, and I know he received it.
Before long, the fighting of the war became so intense that the 213th was moved up near the front, north of a small Korean town called Gapyeong. The battalion was spread out and positioned with the assumption that they were backup support for frontline soldiers. However, due to what's often called the fog of war, these 240 men found themselves completely alone and unprotected on the front line. On the night of May 26, 1951, an enemy brigade of 4,000 Chinese and North Koreans launched a surprise attack on these Utah soldiers. The enemy's overwhelming assault began in the early morning hours. Outnumbered 16-1, the Americans' fight for survival was ferocious.
Canon Parkinson says
get that machine gun nest. And so I locked the gun where those tracers was coming from, and I fired that .50 caliber till the barrel melted.
They fought hand to hand in the darkness, but miraculously, the 240 held their ground. At dawn, Captain Ray Cox led a combat patrol with just 18 men, using a 105mm howitzer as a tank. Following his lead, the patrol hurtled up the valley, destroying numerous machine gun nests and inflicting heavy casualties. The enemy finally withdrew, attempting to climb the surrounding slopes under the intense artillery barrage from the Utah soldiers. This extraordinary counteroffensive convinced the enemy that escape was impossible, and they turned back in massive surrender. As the fighting ended, 350 enemy soldiers lay dead, and 830 were captured or surrendered. But not one man from the Utah 213th lost his life.
I would say it was a miracle that anybody come back. It scares you today to think about it. Wonder how come we could all come back.
We were very glad that they were home. I wouldn't want to go through it again.
Like the stripling warriors, some were wounded, but none were killed, despite the 240 to 4,000 disadvantage. Upon conclusion of their service in Korea, the Utah 213th Field Artillery Battalion was awarded the Presidential Unit Citation by President Harry Truman for courage and bravery in the face of seemingly impossible odds. Colonel Daly was interviewed by the famous CBS broadcaster Edward R. Murrow on national radio.
For moments, I suppose, I was almost dazed. Then instinctively my thoughts turned to God, and I knew that our safety was in the hands of our Maker. I humbly asked for help, as I know and felt that many of the others did who were near me. I feel sure that I was guided by a supreme being.
"50 years later, some of the original soldiers of the 213th Battalion returned to Korea to remember the miracle at Gapyeong. As they took their first look at the modern-day skyline of the beautiful city of Seoul, tears filled their eyes. This shining city that rose from the ashes of the Korean War was a testament of the prosperity that can come from freedom and liberty. They were overcome with emotion as they realized what they had fought for 50 years ago had enabled the good, hardworking people of Korea to rebuild one of the truly great countries of the world.
In the Book of Mormon, we read, "Have miracles ceased? I say unto you, nay. And Christ hath said, If you will have faith in me, ye shall have power to do whatsoever thing is expedient in me." In the Gospel of Luke, we're reminded, "For with God nothing shall be impossible."
I think the reason that I came back along with everybody else was because of the tremendous leadership that we did have, and especially the divine guidance.
And I'm sure that the faith and prayers of our parents and the people, our relatives and that we love and that love us, had the hand of the Lord watching over us. I really believe that.
I think it was like the army of Helaman, those young men. We just felt like we were there to perform a duty, and if we done what we should, why, we'd come home, and we all did.
We prayed for these people in our prayers were answered.
Not all of us are at war and outnumbered 4,000 to 240, but I can tell you that we will all face difficult challenges in our lives. And the lesson that we can take from the miracle at Gapyeong is that when we are true and faithful to the Lord, miracles of all different shapes, sizes, and timing will happen in our lives. To our remarkable youth of today, I say, please, please be faithful. Please be courageous and obedient. Please trust in the Lord with all your heart. I promise that He will direct you for good.